Welcome back to the Mildew Twang Outdoors podcast, where we chronicle our time spent in the Delta, the swamps, the piney woods, and beyond. Here, we share our experiences and stories ranging from simple country living to lesser-known stories of Southern American culture and what all of this means for us as Christians in today's world. If you listened to last week's story, and I imagine that you probably did, you'll recall the phrase ignoramus perfecto. Now, like I stated, I'm not far off from this phrase many times, and this past week, I'm sure I did something silly to be called an ignoramus perfecto, but all of that being said, thank you for joining us again today. There isn't much to say as far as getting this thing kicked off, so why don't you buckle up and hang on for the ride? I know there are a ton of stories we can tell from the boat and from that particular period of your life. Now let's shift gears here and hear from Grammy. And Grammy, I know throughout your life, being married to Pawpaw and being a Mississippi native, the river has had to have an influence on you. Hopefully, you have several things come to mind. There's one particular adventure you took part in that I was hoping you would share with us. Now let's see if we're thinking of the same story.
I don't know. What have you got?
Well, there's a large flood wall in downtown Vicksburg that protects the town from rising floodwaters. Now, what do you know about the flood wall there?
I know a lot about those flood walls. 5 of us women from Vicksburg would go to Paducah, Kentucky to visit a friend that had lived in Vicksburg every year. And Paducah had many, many murals on their flood wall. And we would go home and we would say, I don't know why we can't have murals on our flood wall. Well, that's as far as it went until one day when we were there, we met Robert Dafford, who was the painter of the murals. And we talked to him and said, oh, we would love to have you come paint on our flood walls. So he suggested we buy some of the calendars from Paducah to show our mayor. And we gathered up our 5 ladies and we met with the mayor and we said, look at these pictures. They're beautiful and they're on the flood wall in Paducah. And I don't know why we can't do that on our flood wall. And I said, I think you already have a mural committee. And he said, I sure do. And he said, I think I'm looking at them, meaning us. And so Robert Dafford told us what to do, and we got cranked up and started and had a meeting. And about 30 people showed up interested in having that done. And first we had to collect money to do it. It was $15,000 for each one. And we had to collect a list of not projects, but
Topics.
Subjects. Yeah, to have for the murals. So the committee selected me. I don't know why. I never talk but they selected me to be the chairman of that committee. So we met and made a list of 30 murals that we wanted. And it was a timeline of history of Vicksburg. And then we proceeded to reach out to different people and associations, to get $15,000
For each mural.
for each one.
Okay.
And that was uh, where the trouble came in. Some people were not willing without seeing what we were to do. But Ergon was our first one. And when people saw that mural, it sold them. It was a beautiful, beautiful mural. And I continued with that until we had 32 murals. That's what's on the flood wall right now.
And a mural, one section of the flood wall was 14 feet high and 24 wide?
Yeah.
So these are big pictures.
14 by 24 foot.
Yeah.
Now, I've seen those dozens and dozens of times, but I can't put their size into perspective. When you look at them, the murals just don't seem that big.
Right.
But it took 8 years. But when I did that, I said, I will never, ever again get a project that lasts that long. 8 years is a long time. Yeah. But then I immediately got involved in a homeless shelter. So that's what I'm doing now. And it has been 8 years.
Grammy, we're going to hit one more point about the flood wall, and then we'll move on to the homeless shelter, which we really need to discuss as well. You did get a key to the city for the work on the flood wall, so that's a pretty important piece of recognition.
I did. I got a lot of things, you know.
She was actually selected by the governor to be the volunteer of the year for one of those years.
Yes.
And went down to the Gulf Coast,
Yeah.
Biloxi, and got a big award, and was selected Woman of the Year for 1 year.
Yeah.
Was selected to be the Queen of the Mardi Gras celebration 1 year.
Yep. And the Christmas
parade
Yeah.
1 year.
And I don't talk much. I don't know how that happened.
Well, Grammy, your shoes are too big for all of us to fill, but maybe one day I can live up to them. The flood wall is a project that you began when I was really young, and I remember most of that process, but I was removed somewhat, so many of the details involved have been lost to me over time. The homeless shelter, however, is a project that I've been able to watch develop and in some cases participate in firsthand. Do you mind elaborating on the shelter project?
Okay, our church, the Bypass Church of Christ, decided they wanted a community, or they needed a community project where we could reach out to our own committee, our own community. And Joel DeMette is the executive director of the shelter. But he started looking, and for a family homeless shelter, there were 4 in Mississippi, and much needed in our area. So he proceeded to talk to his friend who had a vacant motel, and they proceeded to start a homeless shelter for families. So now we have about 10 rooms that are for homeless families. Some are like 4 kids and a mother and daddy, which means 6 people in one room. And we have a waiting list. And then there are 4 smaller rooms that we rent out to single people, and those are full. So as of right now, we are full of people, but we are thrilled to death. Some have grown, and that's the idea, for them to do what they need to do to involve themselves in better situations, to make their lives better. And they have moved to an apartment or a house and gotten their family growing in better shape. So that is the total, thing of our goal of us. We love it. One of the rules is they have to go to 1 hour of church, either Sunday or Wednesday. And Joel sees that they do that.
Now, I'm going to ask a question that for some folks might be rhetorical, but for others it may not be. Why is it important that the church be involved in this process in the first place? What is the necessary requirement for church, and why exactly do you have this in the first place?
Well, the ultimate goal is to teach people to become Christians.
Yes.
And so a good number of the folks that come into the shelter are converted and become Christians. In order to expose them to that, one of the rules is you will, as long as you live here, you will attend services at least 1 hour a week. Yeah. And there's been a number of people who have become Christians.
We can have Bible studies with them one-on-one.
So put simply, discipleship is your ultimate goal with the members of the shelter, the folks who are currently housed?
Right. Absolutely.
Right. Nellie is a member of the executive board. She and I guess 4 other people who are members of the church, by the way, all of them, they are the executive board that make all the big decisions and provide guidance and whatnot, as well as meet the legal requirements. State has a lot of controls on that kind of thing. And I serve as the treasurer. Don't get to vote at the board meetings, but and the organization is called Lifting Lives Family Shelter, Lifting Lives. And it's funded entirely by contributions. Our church kicks in a sizable amount. The city of Vicksburg gives about $10,000 a year. And then various other churches, 2 or 3 of the Baptist churches and some of the Methodist churches and some others contribute money, as well as a lot of service work and a lot of individuals. Some of the major contributors are individual people. One of them is a member of your family, by the way. For the first several years, it was kind of difficult to keep up. The expense was outweighing the income quite a bit. The fellow who owned the motel says, okay, if you can pay me the rent, that's great. If you can't, that's okay too. But in more recent years, as the place has become better known, the contributions are up, and it almost get enough every year to sustain the cost. It costs around, was it $120,000 a year and that doesn't include any pay for any worker. That all of that is volunteer. But the rent and the utilities and the maintenance and upkeep and those kind of things run about $120,000 a year.
Such as water is $1,000.
Yeah, the water bill runs right at $1,000 a month. The city collects for the water as though it is a commercial establishment. Yes, and they tell us they don't have any choice but to do that, so they can't give us a break on the water, but they do contribute around $10,000 a year money to the
offset.
And that is the only governmental assistance that comes. They don't get any federal funds. Really don't want any, because the federal government, when they give you funds, they put a lot of requirements on what you can and can't do, particularly regarding religion. And so there's no federal funds at all, but any contribution is greatly appreciated and needed. Several organizations do specific things. There's one, I think it's a Baptist church. Mm-hmm. Every Christmas we'll jump in and provide gifts for all of the children at the shelter, and that's a big help, big thing. Some other churches provide meals maybe once a month or something like that.
Yes, sir. Now, when it comes to different Christian denominations, we can argue about which restaurant to eat at and which congregation is eating at the barbecue restaurant, the Chinese buffet, or the local Mexican joint. But as far as taking care of God's people, we are all called to love Him to serve Him
Right.
and to take care of His creation. I'll make sure we have a link to the shelter and to the church in the description, and we can hopefully reach out for additional support. The shelter has run well for years without a doubt, but additional support is always appreciated.
That would be wonderful.
Pawpaw, one of the primary focuses on this podcast, aside from our gospel outreach and showing folks what it means to be a Christian in today's world, it's to look at American culture and American stories, but to do so with a focus on the outdoors, outdoorsmanship and woodsmanship. I believe there's a story you might have about fishing, about meeting a wildlife enforcement officer in Mississippi.
Yes, sir. Nellie had an uncle in Memphis, her dad's brother. Got injured in the Second World War, had a peg leg, false leg shot off. And he was an alcoholic. He had a lot of needs, and he liked to fish. And so he petitioned me to go fishing with him up in North Mississippi. And so I said, okay, I'll be happy to go fishing with you. I didn't fish a whole lot in those days, but I says, I don't have a fishing license at all. And he said, well, that's not a problem. He says, we were going to one of the old Oxbow lakes off the Mississippi River, and there's a country store down there right near that place that sells fishing license. So we'll stop there and you can get you one. Good. So we go off to go fishing, and we get to that store. It's closed. And it's a good ways from there back to anywhere else. And so I says, well, I can't go fishing. Oh, yeah, you can. Come on. There won't be any game wardens in this part of the world today, so let's just go on fishing, and, we can go get you a license another day. So I did, and we hadn't been fishing probably 30 minutes till here comes a game warden. And so I got a ticket for fishing without a license. Tried to explain to him that I would have had a license if he'd kept his store open, but, it wasn't his responsibility, so I got a ticket, paid a fine. I don't remember how much, but best get a fishing license or a hunting license if you need one.
Now, game wardens are fun to talk with. I've had a few run-ins myself, all of which have been positive, with one exception. Basically, what happened in my situation is that we had a group of friends from church, and we had a member of our church who at the time was a local state wildlife official. He was a nice guy, but we never did really get to know him all that well. We all knew who he was, and being one of 3 young men who sat on the back row of the church, most everybody in the church knew who we were, as it was hard to miss the 3 teenagers sitting together when we could have been out running around doing who knows what. At the time, especially in today's world, that is a pretty rare occurrence, so we weren't hard to miss. Now, after church, we were going to swim out at one of the boys' neighborhood piers on Baymonette Creek. If you're headed towards the church up Highway 225, you cross that little bridge, and northeast of that little bridge, a half mile, there's a big pier. You can jump off the dock and swim, you can put a canoe or kayak in, you can go across the creek and fish and all of that stuff. Well, we dumped our canoe in the water, we climbed down the pier, and we started swimming. But before we really had any chance to make it really up into the creek, here comes the game warden with his little light flashing and his siren whirring. He stopped us and claimed that we were swimming, but not only were we swimming, we were also fishing. Now, we oftentimes did fish together right there in that creek, but on that day we didn't have any fishing rods. Regardless, we gave our names and information, including our fishing license numbers. He then asked to see our life jackets. Now, we didn't have a life jacket in the canoe, which is legally required, and I'm not skirting that fact. But the fact is that we were in bathing suits swimming in waist-deep water on a sandbar, and it didn't matter that we were in shallow water, we had a canoe which required a life jacket. We were each written tickets totaling approximately $300. Now, had we decided to leave the canoe on the pier and swim out in the creek, there would have been no grounds for action, and we would have been more likely to drown. Now, legally, the warden from our church had every right to issue a ticket. It seemed, however, that we might have received some form of leniency on the matter, considering that out of all of our peers in school, we were simple church-going teens interested in having fun outdoors. And that warden knew our character through church, and he knew our intent to swim rather than to fish and canoe up and down that creek. We could have been up to no good anywhere else on that day, but regardless, I learned a lesson that I won't forget.
Let me tell you one that didn't involve me. A little while before I retired, I learned that up at Pawpaw Lake, that's a Corps of Engineer lake it's in the St. Louis district now. It used to be in the Memphis district. They moved it. But at Pawpaw Lake in Missouri, there was an older fellow and his son that were deer hunting with dogs. In other words, the dogs would chase the deer and the deer would circle and come back by. And it was illegal, apparently, to deer hunt with dogs in that state at that time. So the game warden called one of the Corps of Engineer park rangers and says, we know that there's some fellows hunting with dogs. If you happen to see them, would you hold them and call us until we can get there? Okay, so sure enough, in a little while, the park ranger caught this younger fellow, the son, and proceeded to hold him and call the game warden. Before the game warden got there, the boy's daddy showed up. And he was very upset and angry and actually pulled a gun on the park ranger. And so when the game warden showed up, he arrested the guy for hunting with dogs and for pulling the gun on the park ranger. And then the interesting part to me was that when they went to trial, the guy's part of his defense was Corps of Engineer park rangers don't have any authority to make any arrest. And he's right. You know, they're not there to arrest people. They don't carry a weapon at all. The man was claiming that the hold arrest was faulty because the park ranger had no authority to hold the boy but the judge says, you know, you're right. Park rangers, Corps of Engineer park rangers do not have authority to make arrests, but citizens do, and he was a citizen. Well, I used to do a lot with Dusty Rhodes. He was a very close friend. And I guess what you're referring to was one, I guess, on a Saturday back when Tim was fairly young. He and me and another older fellow from the office and Tim, we all went rabbit hunting up a little ways north of Vicksburg, as I remember. I used to rabbit hunt a good bit when I was younger. And I never was really good at it, didn't have any hunting dogs, but we did go hunting that day, and Tim was there, and I think he shot one or two, and I don't know if I got any or not, but we had a real nice time that day up in north of Vicksburg, a little ways.
I've never run rabbits with dogs. Maybe one day I'll get the opportunity to try that.
Well, my granddaddy was a big rabbit hunter back, and I can remember going with him. He lived several miles east of our hometown, Boonville, and it was a low, sort of a swampy area, and they had what they called swamp rabbits, which were bigger than normal rabbits. And he had dogs, and so I'd go with him every now and then. And they told a story about him, and I'm not sure it's true, but they said he used to, back in his younger days, he would chase a rabbit, and he would catch it and then reach down and feel of it to see whether it was big and fat enough and healthy enough to use. And if it was, you know, he would catch it or kill it. And if it wasn't, he'd let it go.
I've never heard of anybody checking rabbits before killing them.
Yeah.
Grammy, I don't know how many stories you might have about the outdoors, but you told me recently about getting stuck in the mud way back out in the woods. Can you please share that with us?
Getting stuck in our car. What was so funny is here's my husband dressed in a gray suit, white shirt, black shoes. We had been to a funeral, but he wanted to go to this graveyard that we used to go to, and it was in the middle of the woods. You had to go on a little dirt road back to it, and that's where his grandmother was buried. So he wanted to go see that. So we found the road to go back in the woods, and we went back like half a mile from the main road and got there, and there was a metal gate, iron gate, with a padlock that you couldn't go on back to where the graveyard was. But when he stopped in a mud puddle. And the mud puddle back there was red. Ooh, no. It wasn't black or brown, it was red. And we got stuck in our car. And he thought he could rock it and get out. But the newfangled cars, you can't rock them.
Man, they shift too slowly.
Yes. So he worked and worked and worked and worked. And the longer he worked, the redder he got. I mean, his suit, his shoes, whatever. But he found a concrete block and used the iron gate to break it into pieces and used the pieces under the wheel and finally got it out. Man. But he was red by that time. The inside of our car was red by that time. And it was kind of scary because we were in the middle of the woods. And I thought, are we going to spend the night in the woods or what? And then he finally was able to get us out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The mud was not deep. It was an old gravel road that used to be, but the gravel had apparently dissolved into the ground over time. Yeah. So the mud was only about 2 inches deep. So we didn't really mire down, but it was too slick. The car wouldn't go.
How long were y'all stuck for?
Probably about an hour.
Yeah.
So stuck in a car in the middle of the woods.
Yes.
Did you have cell phone service?
Well, yeah, we could have called someone,
But who do you call in the middle of the woods? Come find me.
Well, we were probably 15 miles from Pontotoc, Mississippi. So I probably would have called a tow service to come pull us out if we hadn't got out.
I'm glad you guys made it out.
Me too.
But this cemetery was, like you say, a good mile back off of and it's where my dad's mom was buried, and she died when he was 7 years old. Yes. And so we used to go once a year with a lot of other family to have the graveyard cleaning one day a year. I just wanted to go back and see it one more time, but I have an idea that with the gate and you can't get there anymore, it's probably all grown up now.
Now, I've heard a story many times over, Grammy, that involved you and I believe a chicken.
A chicken?
Yes, ma'am. And from what I understand, you had quite an adventure that day.
I did.
Would you mind sharing?
Well, I was 5 years old, which was many years ago, and my daddy was in service, World War II, and we were going with my aunt to town. And so I ran out to get in the car, and I put my hand across the bar between the front and back door.
The doorpost.
The doorpost. And she closed the door. And you know where my finger went? The top of my finger, middle finger, dropped off and fell on the ground. And there were chickens around, and one ran up and got my finger. And when Mother took me to the doctor, he said, Did you bring the rest of her finger? No, a chicken ate it and we didn't know which one. So I have a deformed finger that has always been a constant reminder of chickens. I have sisters and we are very close, and two of them were in the yard of my other sister's in-laws, and they were playing around, and a goat came up, and one of them was so afraid of animals, goats or whatever, and she jumped up in the trailer of the wagon there, and the goat, of course, jumped up with her, and then she jumped out and ran to the house, to the screen, through the screen door, and here comes the billy goat behind her and ran into the house, and the wife of the man started screaming, "Get that billy goat out of here, out of here," and to this day, you can mention billy goat to that sister, and she just has a fit. I still remember, but that was a funny story.
And I have one chicken story. When I was, I guess, 10 years old, I learned that you could run a wire from a plug-in, hot side, to a screwdriver, poke the screwdriver in the ground, and the earthworms would crawl out. So you could just gather fish bait, okay? So I was on the farm that I never worked on much, down at the barn, and I was doing that. And for some reason, it occurred to me that I could probably hook that electric wire to a sheet of tin, metal roofing, and have some fun with the chickens. So I put the wire to the tin and put some corn in the middle of and the chickens, of course, seeing the corn, they would run and step on the tin to get to the corn, and it would hit them, and they'd, of course, jump back. They learned pretty quick that putting their foot on that tin was going to hurt, so they wouldn't do that anymore. So then they would edge up as close to the tin as they could get and try to reach and fall on the tin.
Poor chickens.
Poor chickens. Tim mentioned a time when my dad, his granddad, I don't know how old he was, but my dad's mother had died when he was 7 years old. So he and his brothers grew up with my granddad and no lady in the house. And at one point in time, they had a milk cow. My granddad had gone off somewhere, and he left the boys in charge of taking care of that. And so it came time to milk the cow, and it was cold. It was wintertime, really cold. And they didn't want to go out to milk the cow, so they decided we'll bring the cow in the house where it's warm. So they brought the cow into the kitchen and started the milking process, and then what you would normally be afraid of happened.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
That's not usually the pie you want to see in your kitchen. Well, folks, this episode is coming to a close. There isn't anything that I feel I can say that would add to what has already been stated. You have had the honor and the privilege to spend time with my grandparents as they shared a little piece of heaven with you through the lens of their own eyes. As mentioned earlier, they are tremendous leaders and role models in my life, and God has blessed my family, my siblings, and myself more than we all deserve. One of the key goals of this episode series here, aside from sharing my life with you and sharing the lives of my family with you, is to also bring about attention to the Lifting Lives Family Shelter, the Lifting Lives Ministry opportunity in Vicksburg, Mississippi. As Grammy mentioned, she's played a key role, as well as Pawpaw, They've both played a key role in the formation of that shelter, and they're always willing to work with folks, work with teams that want to help out, provide missions opportunities, and they're also, I hate to say this, but they're also more than happy to accept donations, whether that be monetary or some other means, if you guys are blessed and you feel like helping with that ministry. A link to their website will be listed in the show description, and I strongly urge you to go to that link and read about their opportunities, read about the mission that they provide, and the benefits to the community in the state of Mississippi that they have there right in the heart of Vicksburg. Now, for you touristy folks, I've also attached a link to the Vicksburg Riverfront Murals website. That link allows you to see the murals firsthand on the computer, but it also provides a kind of a bridge to the different features within Vicksburg that you can see as a tourist. On that website, you can see everything from sports to shopping, tours, dining, outdoors, etc., right? Gaming, nightlife, various cultural resources and museums. And having grown up in and around Vicksburg for part of my life, I highly recommend that if you've never been to Vicksburg, take a trip out there and see just what it is that you've been missing. If you have any questions or comments, reach out to me via Spotify podcast or Apple Podcast. I also have an Instagram page up and running under the username @MildewTwangOutdoors, so please check us out. We would love your feedback so that we can continue to develop our show for you, the listener. Remember to share us with your friends, and please follow and rate us as we grow. Love in Christ.